All righty. So let me take a moment to introduce our next presenters here. So we have two presenters from Ezra Penland today. I'm going to start with Sally Ezra. Sally Ezra is a partner at Ezra Penland. Sally has been speaking with actuaries almost daily for over 25 years and thoroughly enjoys all aspects of her work, especially the strong, deep, and long-lasting relationships she has built with actuaries and the employers of actuaries, which are often one and the same. These candidates and clients are the backbone of Ezra Penland actuarial recruitment and have allowed the company to become a preeminent actuarial and data analytics recruitment firm. In her time in the industry, Sally has gained knowledge and insight that allow her to find creative solutions to challenging job searches that provide the best possible fit for the company and the candidate. In addition to actuarial placements, she excels at finding placement at non-traditional companies ranging from data, enterprise risk management, and catastrophe analytics firms to hospitals, startups, fintech, and more. She does practical work to expand the career options within the actuarial field and also does committee and ad hoc project work for various actuarial societies and universities. Ezra Penland provides sponsorship of a variety of actuarial events and causes and provides a twice-a-year scholarship via the LinkedIn group, The Entry-Level Actuary. Sally attends numerous actuarial meetings and symposiums annually and also participates as a speaker, sponsor, and supporter in a wide variety of ways of the actuarial profession. And our second presenter presenting along with Sally is Elian Schechter, actuarial recruiter at Ezra Penland Actuarial Recruitment. Eliana enjoys learning about actuaries' backgrounds and goals and thoughtfully identifying relevant opportunities for their next step. She's detail-oriented and thoughtful about best meeting clients and candidates' needs. With those introductions out of the way, Sally and Eliana, please take it away.
So in the past year, in the past 2 years, really, we saw a lot of changes in terms of sometimes what offers looked like, and as candidates thought about taking offers and went back to their companies to kind of potentially resign or to kind of think about where their place could be, more counter offers that looked a little different than what we had seen in the past. Next slide, please. And so why are we as recruiters thinking about this? So in March of 2020, everything changed, and it changed quickly. With remote working because of the pandemic, we saw broader candidate pools as companies opened up their hiring across the country. And with that, also the interview processes switched to Zoom to kind of more just like tele aspects, and everyone had to adapt in terms of hiring. We initially thought that things might change in a downward direction, but there were actually pushes to hire more, and companies adjusted quickly and became comfortable with remote working. There are about 35,000 actuaries in the US, and so remote working really broadened those candidate pools, and demand just outweighed supply. And very early on, candidates were receiving several offers, and employers realized they needed to make stronger offers. And so with that, we often saw increases of about 20 to 40% in what offers looked like. And so while usually in the past, compensation has been a factor for candidates and why they're looking, we really saw it become the driving motivation. More often, the reason has to do with more with career or personal reasons that kind of motivate that change. But as someone would get an offer and their colleagues or a friend would hear about what the offers could look like, people became aware of what the changing market value of actuarial work looked like, and were a little more open to considering outside opportunities, especially with the remote aspect. Still, overall, we really encourage actuaries to assess their motivations, and before making a move like this, have conversations internally about what they need, because we've seen cases where someone left for a new role without full consideration of what the work would look like or what the fit and environment would be, and would ultimately either return to their former employer or would find a new role. Next slide, please. And so we saw a couple of different factors, both in actuarial and you might have seen on the news more broadly about what parents and non-parents were facing in terms of what work looked like. So with schooling going from normally in person to at home, whether on Zoom or whether it's just pauses in terms of what that could look like, parents in particular face a lot of challenges around managing remote schooling, not necessarily having access to daycare or having a babysitter that they could access easily. And so while balancing the workload and family needs has always been a concern for people, the considerations of what this would look like in the pandemic really shifted that, but also the experience of whether helping their kids with homework or picking them up from games, those aspects of just family life really remained even following the pandemic. And so, for example, a McKinsey research article showed in 2021 that employees with young children were thinking forward about what would come after the pandemic and were more likely to prefer a primarily remote working arrangement, with only 8% desiring to be on site all the time. And still, that said, people who didn't have kids also had similar concerns, whether that was valuing free time or being able to travel while working and see family while remaining productivity and being engaged. And so we heard a lot of stories like that from actuaries, but we also heard stories of people needing to feel a stronger sense of belonging, really focusing in on what their career development and advancement could look like as everything around them stalled in terms of what their life looked like, where they could go and whatnot. And with that, especially as employers and employees were kind of facing this new situation, a lot of employees overall were kind of feeling that their managers didn't necessarily know how to create community and motivate everyone in terms of continuing and advancing on tasks. And so there were concerns there about what their belonging, what their career development could look like in this situation. And something we also noticed with that and have sort of seen continue is even with remote work at the time, and even now as companies kind of create more flexibility around what that can look like, we've seen concerns about what upward mobility in a role or in a company will look like, particularly in terms of if someone joins a company, will they be one of the few remote employees, and what does that look like in the long term for them? Next slide, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm hoping that we have a little time for Q&A after this, because I feel like people have individual situations that they might want to ask questions about. So we'll try to go through this quickly. But as Eliana mentioned, it has become a candidate-driven market, and mostly because, well, there's the demand is just so high, the potential for remote opportunities and increased compensation. More candidates have choices as to where they or want to accept an offer or decide to look, and where they ultimately want to be. And it's really caused a lot of problems for the employers of actuaries. And we've seen employers ask a lot about what do we do? And so as recruiters, for the first time ever, we've actually encouraged candidates to accept counteroffers. It's completely contrary to everything that I've ever believed. I've always thought that accepting a counteroffer is a bad idea. Usually it's a Band-Aid, it's just a quick fix. But in this case, the employer that you're giving notice to is having problems figuring out how to handle their internal compensation structure, but you don't know if the company that you're accepting an offer with is having the same issues. They probably are. Almost all companies have had real difficulty figuring out how to compensate people properly, because whenever they bring somebody in, they're bringing them in at a nice big increase and probably causing internal equity problems. So whenever they hire somebody in at 20, 30, 40% higher than the person's previous compensation, they're probably hiring that person in at a good percentage higher than what the existing employees are at. And so to leave your company that's been trying to figure out how to handle this compensation inequity to going to another company that probably has the same issues if you're only leaving for money, it makes sense to talk about the counteroffer, to hear what your company's doing and to make sure that your motivation is right. There's one thing that we've seen a little bit more of, and that is people moving for a higher compensation and actually not being particularly thrilled with the position that they accepted. And so you have to make sure that you've examined every reason you're looking to make a move. And if it's only for compensation, like Eliana mentioned, make a list of what your motivations are. Figure out, is it just money? Is there opportunity that you're looking for that doesn't exist in your current situation? And no matter what the case is, it's a good time to have really open dialogue with your current employer. For better, for worse, we don't mind going through the process with a candidate who's kind of in that exploration stage. But I think that if you can hammer out some of the reasons you're looking to make a move prior to going through the process, it could save you a lot of headache and you'll be able to breathe easier. You'll just be more satisfied with the outcome than actually having to go through the interview process, accept an offer, get a counteroffer, turn it down, and then go through the stress of having to turn down the company that you've recently accepted an offer with. So I would say that one of the most important things you can do right now is to really have open communication. And if that's a problem with your current employer, then that's a problem. It is time to possibly look outside. But I think more often than not, you'll find that your current employer is having difficulty figuring out how to handle the current situation. If it's a situation where you're looking for more money and additional responsibility, bring it up. See, figure out what is really important to you and talk about the whole picture. Next slide, please. Great. So a few things to think about. What is driving you to look elsewhere? Make a list. Actuaries oftentimes like to put together weighted spreadsheets, figure out what's most important to you, and kind of write everything out, and then I guess weight it or figure out, what are your priorities. Whenever you're looking at another offer, does it match your needs? If it does, that's great. That's wonderful. If you find that your current employer matches your current needs more than the offer that you're kind of considering, that's something to think about. Are there any issues that could be addressed internally that could make your current situation better than the offer that you have at hand? If so, worth having the conversation. If not, maybe it does make sense to go ahead and make a move. And then I think this is the most important. If you do give notice, prior to giving notice, think about, is this really, am I looking at a Band-Aid situation? Or if I accept a counteroffer for more money, is this just a Band-Aid? Or does this really look at, in a more holistic way, what my career goals are, what my personal goals are? Does this meet my needs? If the new opportunity really does meet your needs, if you like the new people, if the opportunity is really more attractive to you long-term, even if the counteroffer is a little bit higher than the offer that you're considering, look at the long-term picture. It's not a good time to look at the short-term situation. So if you're just moving for money, wait until you find the right opportunity. Don't take that offer just for the money. If you get a counteroffer that's higher, but the whole opportunity isn't exactly what you're looking for, it's time to make a move. So those are just some things to consider. Next slide, please. For the employer, when you are making a counteroffer, you need to also make sure that you're doing it for the right reason. Nobody wants to be short-staffed at this point. It's hard to hire new people. It's expensive to hire new people. You will continue to have the perhaps have the inequities and compensation within your department because the offers are still coming in stronger. I really thought in 2023 that the salaries were going to level off a little bit, and maybe they have a little bit. We're not seeing the 30 and 40% increases to make a move now, but we're still seeing strong offers come out, and candidates, particularly at certain levels, new associate, new fellow, they're getting multiple offers. So although nobody wants to have a gap in their department for all those reasons, figure out if the best thing to do is whether to make a counteroffer. Are you going to see the person who gave notice as being kind of somebody who's going to ultimately ultimately leave anyway? Or do you believe that they are loyal and so-called trustworthy in terms of being really committed to your company and your team? Are they going to leave anyway? In the past, most people that accepted counteroffers left within a year, even 6 months. Again, now, if it is just because of money, we're not seeing that as the case. People who have these real, I guess, forthright conversations with their current employers and accept a counter, they seem pretty stable. Is this person a key team member, or do they provide some sort of skill that is super valuable? And then how does this impact others? If somebody's leaving and it leaves a hole, and everybody else who remains is going to have to work extended hours to make up for that person, that's going to cause a problem, because those people that are putting in the extra work are going to really realize that, okay, I could make a move, make more money, and not have to work so hard. So you want to make sure that you are staffed properly. And these are just some things to consider. Do we make the counteroffer? If you not making the counteroffer is going to impact others very negatively, you don't want to lose more people. If you do make the counteroffer so that other people aren't impacted, it's a good time to look at their compensation too and make sure that they're compensated properly, because just keeping that person, giving them a counter, keeping them without adjusting the compensation throughout the team, you're going to have other problems. Next slide, please.
So we saw in the last few years several examples of what counteroffers could look like and how people responded to them. So I'll just go over a few. With the first one, we saw this a few times, whether that was moving from an insured to another insurer, or in some cases from consulting to an insurer. In these cases, the counteroffer would match or even increase compensation compared to what the offer looked like. And we saw cases where candidates really considered this deeply, but ultimately considered that what had brought them to the table in terms of looking wasn't less important than, it was more important than the money, really. And so in those cases, we saw people reject the counteroffer and move on to another opportunity. In the next two examples, in this one, the competitor, a guy was at a company, and one of their key competitors offered him an opportunity to lead their main initiative. It would be a 10% salary boost. He went back to his employer and told them about this, and they very quickly regrouped and made plans to actively include him on new initiatives, and they matched the offer. In this case, he accepted the counter offer, and it brought up the possibility that if he had had this conversation with them prior to looking, he might have kind of had these issues addressed earlier on. In the third example, we saw one where someone was offered a new role. It would have been in a new line of business. It would be a 20% salary increase with a likely promotion after a year in this line of business. Throughout the process, he started talking with his manager about how he was looking at outside opportunities to develop other experience, other skills. And the company very quickly courted him for a higher level AVP role, having him meet with different vice presidents and different leaders about a role that could have new responsibilities and higher compensation. In this case, he accepted it. He did initially go back to the other company to see what they could do, but the degree to which the role he was being offered internally just couldn't be matched externally. Next slide, please.
Some of the takeaways we want to leave you with is, first of all, to really consider your motivations and your reason for looking elsewhere. Whenever possible, think kind of in the future. If I get an offer, what am I going to do with it? What's most important to me? If it's just money, what am I going to do about that? And if it is just money, to make sure that meaning that's your main reason for making a move, make sure to look for something that meets your other goals, your other professional and personal goals. Otherwise, if it's just for money, hopefully you do get a counteroffer and could just remain where you are if you're currently satisfied with the opportunity you have. With any situation, you really need to look and figure out what the best option is for you. Again, both personally and professionally. In the past, I think most of the main reason people made a move was for professional reasons. And now I think that the personal side really plays into it. Do you want to be remote? Do you want to be hybrid? Are you looking to go into the office more? What does it look like to manage remotely? What does it look like to learn to manage remotely? How is the team? How is the cohesiveness of the team? So, I mean, you just look at everything and figure out what is best for you. That's advice we give for anybody at any time. You need to figure out what your best option is. We don't want to see anybody make a move and then regret it. And so putting the consideration into it throughout the process, perhaps before the process, and having as much open dialogue with your current employer is key to really making sure that you're making the best decision for you. Money, as we've seen through the process, is not everything. Happiness actually is pretty important. So just make sure that you're doing things for the right reasons. And is your current company valuing you? If you're working remotely, is this something your company is comfortable with? There's so many factors that you need to look at in terms of the value that your company puts on you. Are they giving you the opportunity to do things that you want to do? And if not, again, have those conversations. Make sure that your company's commitment to your growth is what you want it to be. And again, if not, let's look for a new job. That's great. It's a good time to consider making a move. But if everything you have is where you are, that's something to be very cognizant as well. And next slide. I think we have quite a good amount of time for some Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Sally and Eliana. Folks, if you have any questions, please submit in the chat box. It looks like we have one so far, guys. So are you starting to see a shift back to 100% on-site positions, or is the market still mostly split with remote and hybrid?
It's completely split. Well, I can give a couple of examples. We have a client who happens to be in Chicago. They are looking for people to be on site 3 days a week. We are having such a hard time finding people to pursue those opportunities. I kind of thought 3 days a week, well, that's perfect. You're kind of work from home a little bit, have some time with other people, and that would be an attractive option. And it's an attractive option for some people, but their candidate supply is very sparse for the companies that are looking for people to commit to being in the office multiple times a week. On the other hand, we have one client, again, is coming to mind, where they were completely adverse to remote work. They were looking to hire, couldn't find anybody. They're kind of in a rural, well, they're a couple hours outside of hour and a half outside of a larger city, medium-sized city. And they were having a hard time finding people that would want to relocate there, and there was no local candidate supply. They finally opened it up to remote work. And initially, even though they opened it up, the leadership wasn't very accepting of the idea that people were going to work remotely. And so we were trying to help them. And they said, well, we're looking for this level, but they're not going to have any supervisory or management responsibilities. And it's unlikely that that will happen for them down the road unless they're willing to relocate to the area eventually. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. I mean, if the company is not going to buy in to the employees that really deserve to be, I guess, developed, their careers deserve to be developed, and that's what people want. So it wasn't going to work. And somehow the company really did ultimately buy into it, but it was a little bit like pulling teeth.
Very good. And I think you touched on this follow-up question here. Have you seen any instances of motivation to move due to Zoom ceiling?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard it called that before, but I like that terminology. For sure. Whenever I think there's, A couple things, and Eliana touched on this a little bit, but particularly during the time when nobody was going into the office, one of the reasons people wanted to make a move is that they were bored. They're at home all the time, they're seeing the same people all the time, and they just needed a new challenge. And now we are seeing people look again because they really want that next step in their career. In fact, I would say that's one of the main motivations we're seeing right now. And I do think there's a bit of a Zoom ceiling, that they're not being recognized for all they do and all the value they add. And it probably is because they're not sitting next to their in a group with their team. Whenever somebody's in the office and they're interacting closely with the underwriters or claims or whichever, finance, whatever department, they pick up things and learn things and add value in ways that they are not going to be able to do through Zoom. And I think that's definitely played a part in people's kind of being stagnant in their careers. Eliana, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the times when we've seen maybe exceptions to that rule have been when the broader company went largely remote. We saw a case of a large insurer where not only did the actuarial team go entirely remote over the pandemic, but most of the company did too. So in that case, it's been more of a level playing field, but for the most part, when it's a bit of a split within the company, that potential Zoom ceiling can be there.
Awesome. Next question here. If money is a driving factor, does it make sense to discuss with management before looking to make a move, or better to have an offer in hand?
I think a lot of people are much more comfortable if they have another offer in hand because it takes a lot of the risk out of it. And I alluded to this whenever I said that we don't mind going through the process with people because we realize sometimes people have to go through that process to be able to have the motivation or courage to have that conversation with their current employers. And so I think most people would feel a little bit more comfortable if they had the other offer in hand. But for those who are really great communicators and comfortable with having difficult conversations and handling those in a very mature way, they can probably save a lot of time and build a closer relationship with their current management team or their current manager or supervisor or whatever the case is, if they are able to have that conversation. Again, Eliana, do you have anything more to add to that?
No, I think that's what I've seen as well. Is it really depends on what conversations they've had before or are comfortable having, whether in terms of compensation or what they're hoping to do next in their career.
Yeah, one of the ways I think to start that conversation is say to your manager, this is a really difficult conversation for me to have, but this has been on my mind and I want to discuss it with you. And I think like kind of mentioning that it's a difficult conversation, it perhaps will lower your manager's guard and make them appreciate the fact that you're actually having the conversation instead of being annoyed by it.
Very good. Next question. As carriers have a tendency for a more traditional workforce, do you see a future where more actuarial work is outsourced to consulting companies that might be more comfortable with a flexible workforce? Or do you see the carriers evolving for their actuarial workforce?
I think the carriers did a great job evolving. It was shocking whenever everyone went remote. Was that March, April, May of 2020? Within weeks, we had people interviewing through video conferencing, not going on site for the interview and starting their careers or starting their new jobs remotely. And it's more or less remained that way. Again, it's such a conservative industry in so many ways. And even some of the companies where the CEO kind of had a from top down mandate that people will be coming back into the office, even those companies, a couple of larger insurers, even they were able to get management to back down. They were losing too many people. It's not a good time to dictate what people are going to do.
Another question. In any discussion of age, phase retirement, part-time work? So I guess just those topics.
Okay, I'm going to jump back in and answer one more part of the last question is, I don't see much more of the work going to consulting firms because it's flat out more expensive. So I don't think that the companies are going to hire more consultants to do the work unless they have to. So I don't see that. And then going to the next question, we have seen people that I would have thought were closer to retirement, or perhaps in the past had talked about retirement, take new jobs. And I think more so than ever, people that know what they're doing have tons of experience and really can add value to an organization. They're being considered for roles that in the past that maybe they wouldn't have been considered for. So it's been kind of neat. I've always pretty much told people like who have asked me, should I take my graduation date off my resume? Should I shorten my resume? Part of me, I've always kind of thought, well, they're going to figure out when you graduated and about when you started your career, and you want a company that's going to value your experience and that be more important to them than your age. But more so than ever, I've seen people that are past the traditional retirement age take new positions. And Eliana, please jump in if you have anything additional to say.
I've seen similar things on that one. I think we've also seen more people that are nearing retirement that have spoken to us about not necessarily wanting to retire entirely, but to find contract work or consistent part-time work as well.
Yeah, we know of a firm, a health firm, that is hiring people on a contract basis, and they prefer to have people that are kind of semi-retired, not really quite ready to retire, but wanting to stay busy and earn a little extra money. And I just learned of a new life consulting firm that's doing the same thing. So that is a real thing that's happening.
All right. From the talent pool you guys have helped recently, roughly what % of candidates are open to offers from companies that are 100% in office versus more flexibility, remote or hybrid work?
From what I've seen in my experience, the candidates that are open to being in the office have really been open to hybrid, sometimes open to 4 days, but usually kind of the cutoff from what I've seen in terms of openness to hybrid has been around 2 or 3 days. And there's more, I think there's been more desire for remote work, but even with that, I've heard from people that might want a mostly remote situation, but the desire to go in occasionally and really build those relationships there as well.
I think we have one client right now that's looking for 5 days a week in the office. So I think whenever we talk about the person being on site anymore, it is hybrid. When they want somebody on site, usually it's 3 days a week, not 4, not 2. But if the candidate's a great fit, wants 2 days a week, usually something can be figured out. Like maybe it's 2 days a week, but if there's a special meeting, they go in for the 3rd day, or there's all sorts of scenarios that can take place.
Looks like we have another one coming in. Have you happened to know the following? Cigna came to our program to do presentation and recruitment. They said their typical actuarial employees will double their salary, not income, in about 5 years and triple in about 10 years. My best / strongest students and I felt this is quite overstated. I would appreciate your insight regarding this.
So if they start somebody at 75,000, they're saying this person's going to be making 2.25 within 10 years. I think some of the students they hire will be doing that, but I can't imagine the entire class. Yeah. Yeah, that would be a really, I think the double in 5 years is probably 75, 150. I would say the majority would double in 5 years. For 5 years of experience, currently somebody making 135 plus bonus is not out of the question at all. And then 5 years from now, that salary is going to go up. And actually with inflation and cost of living adjustments, maybe it's not that far-fetched now that I think about it. Maybe the majority of the students would be at 2.25 in 10 years from now. Okay, I buy into what they're saying. I had to do a little bit of a mental gymnastics on that one, but I buy into it, particularly with the cost of living. Exam increases, promotions. Cigna has a strong rotation program. Cigna values their actuaries quite a bit, and the ones that probably wouldn't make it to like the higher levels of compensation increases probably will be leaving to go elsewhere. I think Cigna's good at kind of encouraging people that aren't really the strongest players to, perhaps find a better fit for them. And I should say strongest players within their own environment. But I think with the cost of living, inflation, et cetera, that's a possibility.
All right. Next question here. Please speak to non-traditional actuarial careers. Have you been approached by employers that outside of insurance consulting, health? And conversely, do you have candidates coming to you looking for a non-traditional work employer?
Elian, I would kind of say that currently besides the occasional non-traditional employer, the software development firms, and which is actually partly traditional work, but I would say a lot of what I would consider to be non-traditional are the people that are joining startups or insurtech. So, for example, there's an actuarial position we're working on currently, and it's with the insurtech startup, and they're small and they have an actuary on staff, but that person wants to hire somebody to be their lead actuary because really he's more interested in leading the underwriting efforts and also being part of the strategic direction and operational part of the company, which opens up an actuarial position, which is doing a lot of traditional work, but in a very non-traditional environment. And also that person's going to have to get involved in a lot of different things that people at a large, more traditional company won't have to get involved in, because when you're part of a startup, you kind of just get your hands into everything. Can you think of something that has popped up recently, Eliana?
Yeah, I think we've mostly seen it with the insurtechs or the startups of that kind. And then in terms of the other part of the question, in terms of what candidates who are perhaps looking for that, we do see that. I don't know that we always see it phrased as wanting to directly go to insurtech, but maybe more along the lines of wanting to get a little bit more into predictive analytics or modeling of that kind that isn't necessarily always part of the traditional actuarial environment.
That's a good point. Eliana, the next question is, what percentage of companies are looking for 5 days a week? I would say it's almost none. I mean, except we have one exception, but can you think of any others that are looking for 5 days?
Yeah, I can't really think of any. And I think of the ones that perhaps started with that desire even for 4 days, within time came to realize it wasn't going to be feasible for getting fair quality candidates for what level they were looking for.
Yeah, I think this is a relevant story, but whenever people were starting to go back into the office, this one person who was looking said, our company wants us back in 4 or 5 days a week. And I feel so unappreciated because I was working so hard remotely and being able to balance my family, all the work that I have to do around the house, and then working full time. And really, she said, I think I did a great job. And now for them to come back and say, now you need to be in 4 or 5 days a week, to me, it feels like they're not appreciating everything I did. And so I thought that was an interesting viewpoint, because people are able to work effectively remotely, and saying that they need to come back in whenever they're really probably not necessarily needing to be in the office is kind of like taking them for granted in a way, that their time's not important and that they can't make the best decisions for themselves and for the company and their jobs. Alice, can you help decipher the next question? And I'm not sure where we are on time.
We've got time until 1, so 21 minutes left. So keep the questions coming, people. Just some comments, it looks like here. Okay, looks like one's just come through. How willing are life companies to hire actuaries with a health background and vice versa? Any patterns of success, speaking mostly at ASA level, since the exam material isn't track specific up to them.
Yeah, so we've seen a little bit, in some situations more resistance to that, and in others more acceptance of it. And I know I feel like everything I talk about, there's always exceptions to it, or there's no one real clear answer to any specific question. But in general, companies want to hire people that can come in and get to work and have the experience needed, where they don't need tons of training, tons of hand holding, etc. So it's always a little bit hard to make a change, particularly after 2, maybe 3 years of experience. Prior to that, if you can make a strong case for why you want to make a move, say from life to health, and again, you only have 2 or 3 years of experience, I think that a lot of companies would be open to considering you. But whenever I mention that you have to be able to make a strong case as to why you're interested in health over life, if you've just sent your resume into the portal and haven't talked to a human, they're just going to look at your resume. And if they have other candidates that have life experience, you're probably going to be passed up for somebody who has relevant experience. Frankly, this is a really great time to use a recruiter who can kind of be your advocate, or to work through people who know you. Oftentimes, if you can make that change within your own company, that's a good place to start. If there's a rotation, or if you're at a life company and they have an arm that works mostly with life and health, you could kind of segue into the health side. And then once you're in the life and health area, you could possibly it'd be easier to make a move to a health insurer. But once you've gotten to the ASA level, you really need to speak to the hiring manager, whatever that takes, and be able to give good reasons as to why you want to do this and why you're going to be successful, and how you'll be a great long-term employee, meaning that all the time they're putting into developing you into this new field, that it will pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and I would say the one case I've at least seen with this is someone who moved from being around a director level at a large health insurer to moving into life insurance, but moved into an associate actuary role. But in doing so, my understanding was that he took a significant pay cut. So there's also that factor in considering that move as to what potential level you would come in and how that potential compensation band would compare to where you currently are and what could be feasible for you.
All right. Unless there are any last minute questions, I think you guys have covered a lot here. All righty. Well, thank you, Sally. Thank you, Eliana, for sharing with us today. And that's a conclusion of day 3 of the spring ACSW meeting. We'll be meeting tomorrow at the same time, 11 to 1, with 2 more presenters. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you all.
Yeah.